Hello and welcome back to the second part of the video about the Israeli deck nerfing problem. I'm Karagoth. Let's continue our little quest to resolve the greatest injustice that has been made in the Wargame Red Dragon strategy franchise to one of the most promising yet disappointing DLC factions. That would be none other than the Israeli faction. Points of reference regarding the deficiencies of the Israeli deck. There are 12 points of reference. We are going to try to touch each and every one of them, but note that some of them are self-explanatory, so there is no need to rehash them, only to point them out. Alright, number 1. No exceptional optics unit. As I said, self-explanatory, merely stating a fact. Israel does not have exceptional optics units in its deck, while all other or most other nations have the ability to call upon some sort of a unit with exceptional optics on it. The Israeli deck has no exceptional optics unit in its deck, none whatsoever. Point number 2, recon helicopters. The Israeli recon helicopter has no weapons on it, none whatsoever, while all other nations have some sort of a weapon on their recon helicopter. Some even use super weapons like the Ka-52 or the Tiger, or other nations can call upon a recon helicopter that can fire long-range missiles and deal with both air and ground. The Israel helicopter has no weapons, so it cannot defend itself basically against anything, so it's almost useless. It serves only as a recon helicopter, but it cannot deal damage, so and it is useless because it cannot defend itself and it falls easy prey to anything it comes across. Point number 3, weakest and lowest AP power medium tanks in the game. We have discussed this in the previous video. Point number 4, there are no autocannons in the Israeli deck, none whatsoever. Point number 5, infantry carrier is weak and unmobile compared to other nations. We have discussed this in the former video. Point number 6, no super weapons. We will elaborate on that. Point number 7, weak long range anti-air units. And point number 8, recon units that cannot be used to much effect. We're talking about the Israeli recon tab. We will elaborate on that. Point number 9, slot design flaws, which comes in direct connection with the inability to use the Merkava 2A. We will go into that. Point number 10, it is not a cost-effective deck. Point number 11, lack of key weapons on units. Point number 12, which is the Israeli nation deck is only good in as a support deck in 10v10, but is almost ineffective in a 1v1 overall. Alright, there is a point I want to address before we touch the anti-air problem that the Israeli deck has, and that point is the design flaw of the slots and availability concerning the Israeli deck, which can also close the book about the use of the Merkava 2A, or better yet, the inability for an Israeli deck player to even consider using the Merkava 2A, and I will explain. You see, when it comes to the Israeli deck, the imbalance is all connected. In the previous video, we were discussing point number 4, which is the Israeli deck has no autocannons to support its troops. And point number 5, which is infantry carriers are weak, slow, and unmobile. Those deficiencies, they come hand in hand and with direct connection with the point number 9 and number 10, which are slot design flaws, and I will elaborate on that, and the cost effectiveness. You see, some would argue that you could use the Merkava 2A to overcome the deficiency number 5, which is slow and non-mobile infantry carriers. The Merkava 2A is still slow and non-mobile and has a very big problem with its cannon ammo, only 9 rounds. Once it reaches the front, it will be able to support your troops very effectively, yes, but problem is it will still get there too late, and so the race to reach the point on the map is still lost. And if you are playing the Israeli deck and also it is not cost effective. It costs 100 points or more depending on the infantry unit you pick to occupy it. So furthermore, the biggest problem trying to use that unit comes with direct connection with point number 9, which is the slot design flaw. You see, if you're trying to use that unit, not only that it will cost you 100 points, that other nations can get that very same unit for 50 or 60 points, because let's be honest here, you're getting this tank only because of the grenade launcher, right? So, but also it is still a medium tank, and it cannot hold its own against enemy medium tanks, which most certainly reach the front even faster than your medium tank reaches the front. So you're still at the deficiency. And the use of it, as I just mentioned, comes in direct connection with point number 9, a slot design flaw. You will have to take off the infantry tab, a key unit occupying a slot, that you cannot afford to take off the infantry tab in order for you to be able to use the Merkava 2A. Something that you just won't do, because if you try, you will only put your deck in a far bigger deficiency, not being able to deal with other key situations. Same goes for the aircraft tab. Israel has a lot of fancy planes, but you just won't get to use them for the very same reasons. The use of the Israeli air tab comes in direct connection with the deficiency the Israeli deck has in its anti-air support tab. You won't get to use some of the planes because you would need to use 2 slots of your air tab to be filled with the air superiority fighters in order to compensate for the lack of your ability to deal with enemy aircraft from the ground. You have a major deficiency using mediocre anti-aircraft guns and rockets. So in the support tab. So in order to compensate for that, you, as I said, you will need to use 2 air superiority fighter and use 2 slots to that effect. So you see, some units are there, but they cannot be used because the deficiencies the Israeli deck has prevent you from using them. The entire concept of the Israeli deck is to use multiple units to achieve the goal that other decks can achieve with less units. But I think Eugen somewhere along the line forgot to give the correct amount of slots and points to enable the player using the Israeli deck to be able to use the multitude of units needed to be used in order for him to defend himself and achieve his mission. So you see, it's all connected. Alright, let's finally address the Israeli nation's support tab regarding its anti-air abilities. We are going to do this while taking into account all other considerations that cannot be overlooked, which are firstly that we are using the normal Israeli DLC deck and not motorized, mechanized or any other specializations, because any use of such specializations will bring about restrictions in accessibility to the use of other key units in the Israeli deck, which would lead to far greater deficiencies, and we are here to try to fix those very same deficiencies and not add to them. So again, we will be referring to the normal build of an Israeli DLC deck, not specialization decks. Secondly, the choices that would have to be made to put forth the best anti-air ability this deck can provide using the support tab. Alright, the Israeli DLC nation has 5 slots to fill using its support tab. So let's think about it for a moment. Assuming that you're an experienced player, you cannot forego certain choices while using the support tab. So before we even go into the choices of loading any of the air defense systems onto your deck, there are choices that cannot be overlooked, which are of course the artillery and mortars that you will have to be using in your support tab using the Israeli deck. Having said that, considering that you have only 5 slots to fill using the Israeli support tab, That leaves you with nothing more than 3 empty slots to be used and filled with anti-air defense systems. You got the Chaparral anti-air system. It can provide you with good level of long-range anti-helicopter defense system. It cannot be targeted by seed, which makes it perfect and ideal for the job of countering helicopters, even dealing with the enemy super weapon helos that carry seed on them, like the Super Cobra or the Ka-52. And while it is somewhat low accuracy, only 45% accuracy, the long range on its missiles countering helicopters is more than enough to deter enemy helicopters from invading your airspace. It can even take them out if the air defense system has a chance to fire a few rockets at the enemy helicopter. So it is a very good defense system against helicopters, no doubt about that. But as far as using it for a long-range air defensive system against planes, it is inadequate. It quite simply does not have the range to deal with incoming aircraft good enough to take them out before they themselves get targeted or bombed by the incoming planes. Furthermore, they have only 2 kilometer, 300 meters of range, so against planes, so you would need 4 to 6 of those units, costing you 220 points to 330 points to be able to use that air defense system to counter planes somewhat effectively once those planes are advancing into your airspace and entering into the firing range of those anti-air defense systems. So, which doing so is just as I said, it's not effective, it's not cost effective, and such concentration of Chaparral units in the same area is most likely to bring about an enemy artillery strike on their position, or even worse, an aircraft bombing run on their position. But because it is a very effective unit against choppers, you would absolutely pick that unit to occupy one of the 3 slots available to you, choosing air defense systems. Of course, that other nations like the US, NORAD, some of the Red 4 nations have variants of that very same defense system weapon, and they have it with better accuracy and greater range, better stats, but you will still want that unit loaded onto your deck because it can still serve you, it is still very beneficial to you with even lesser stats compared to what other decks are using. The BTR. Okay, the BTR, very low accuracy of 25% and poorly armored, and while poorly armored and very low accuracy, having a cheap wheeled, very short ranged anti-air unit is a must-have. It can provide you as a band-aid for gaps you have around the map, serving you as an early warning system of impending infantry airdrops by your opponent, and it can serve you as a way to counter opponents' air units trying to sneak into your rear areas. So having such a unit in your deck is a must-have. Also, the use of a cheap-wheeled anti-air unit can give complementary stun effect to your missile defensive system countering helos, like the Chaparral we have just discussed. And why would you want your Chaparral to be complemented by this cheap BTR? Well, it is because the Chaparral on its own, believe it or not, can be overpowered by an advancing chopper. The reason for that is simple. It is because the low accuracy on the Chaparral, coupled together with the fact that it needs more than a single hit to take down an enemy chopper, puts it in a rather somewhat, how shall we say, perilous situation that you would wish to avoid. So using a cheap-wheeled anti-air unit is a must-have. This is especially true and non-negotiable using the Israeli deck, considering your deck has nothing powerful enough that can both, firstly, not be targeted by seed, and secondly, deal with incoming air threats. So this BTR unit is also something that you cannot afford not to have in your deck. And by using that unit on its own and in close collaboration with the other anti-helo defensive systems like the Chaparral we have just discussed, you can, how shall we say, close the book on a very big aspect of warfare, by covering every eventuality on short-ranged anti-air support provided to your army and your units. Alright, now after having discussed the problems that needed to be addressed and solutions to be given in order to rectify the problems in the short-range anti-air support department, we are moving on now and going over to the real problem in the Israeli deck, which is, as mentioned before, finding a solution to the long-range anti-air defense deficiency while trying to counter enemy planes using the Israeli deck. May I remind you that we have one slot left to be filled, but it wouldn't even matter if we had 3 more slots available to us in the support tab, because our options are not looking too comforting, and those options are debatable between 2 classes of units and 2 units within each of those classes. Again, if I'll be honest, none of those options can be considered as a satisfactory solution to the deficiency problem. We have the Hovet, the Machbet, the Shenav, and the Shenav 2. And let me tell you right off the bat why you wouldn't even bother and waste your time on the Hovet and the Shenav, and why the real dilemma here is between the Shenav 2 and the Machbet. First off, we wanted something that has range, long enough range, so we would be able to deal with aircraft, and also we want something that can operate as a wide net anti-air defensive system. So the Hovet automatically goes out of the question, having the shortest range out of the 4 options we have before us. Now, if we examine the Shenav system, you can see we are looking at a somewhat mediocre long-range anti-air system. It has a very poor off-road speed of 35 kilometers per hour, mediocre road speed of 110. Basically, what this means that it would be very difficult for you to get those units into position, and they are most likely to be spotted en route and even be destroyed by enemy planes. So the mediocre accuracy on it doesn't add to that already poor stats. It is very below average accuracy of 50% compared to what other nations are using. And if you will go deck by deck, you will find that most of the other nations using long-range anti-air systems have a rather higher accuracy compared to that. Most other nations have a 55, 60, 65, and sometimes even 70% accuracy compared to that shitty unit. So you just wouldn't bother with that unit, and you will try to seek something better to provide you with air cover to help you deal with the enemy aircraft invading your airspace. Furthermore, this unit is very low key on self-sufficiency. It carries only 3 rockets, and as said about the off-road speed of 35 kilometers per hour, is nearly completely useless. When it's in position, it barely moves, and once the enemy can see where the missile came out of, it can bomb its location. We're using aircraft and artillery, so you wouldn't be able to escape the aftermath. So it's a sitting duck. It has no speed to allow it to be mobile enough to evade enemy return fire, and it's just a shitty unit. It's just a shitty unit. You just wouldn't want that unit at your deck at all. It's not too much of a cost-effective unit. 60 points for that unit it's just not a good trade-off. It's not a good deal. You wouldn't want that unit. The Shenav 2. The Shenav 2, which is a slightly improved version of the regular Shenav, has pretty decent accuracy to it, 55%, and a max range of 4 kilometers, 200 meters, but it is also stricken by the same deficiencies the regular Shenav has. It suffers from the same problems. very low off-road speed of 35 kilometers per hour and somewhat mediocre road speed of 110, which basically means that while trying to get it to the front, it is most likely to be spotted or killed by enemy aircraft. While it gets there, while it's in the front lines, it can barely move, it can barely defend itself from return fire, or act as a mobile moving system to accompany your advancing army effectively. So what we are talking about is really 70 points of crap. It is slow, it's unmobile, the autonomy is bad, only 300 kilometers or so. So you don't get a lot of them, only 4 per card to occupy the slot. And for the cost of 70 points, it is still a very bad deal. It can be targeted by seed, so again, nothing special about this unit. And may I remind you that other nations can get more for less points, in addition to having a far better deck than the Israeli deck is using. So for example, while the Shenav 2 unit costs 70 points and you only get 4 units per card, the Kortal used by some of the other nations has better road speed of 150 kilometers per hour, better off-road speed of 60 kilometers per hour, and better accuracy of 60%. And cannot be targeted by seed, which is by itself a huge advantage to be having as a solution to deal with enemy aircraft. It's even packing 1 extra missile than what you get by using the Shenav 2. The Shenav 2 has 3 missiles, the Kortal has 4, and while it might not have the long range of 4 kilometers, 200 meters of the Shenav 2, and only 2 kilometers, 625 meters, it is definitely a great solution to deal with enemy planes. It is fast, it is mobile, it has a good autonomy of 500 kilometers. It will most probably hit its mark and hit its targets in the air with its 60% accuracy. It is more sustainable in the field, and you will get 3 more units per card as compared to what you get with the Israeli deck, only 4 per card. So we're talking about 7 per card and 4 per card. So again, this deal with the Shenav 2 is not a very good deal. There's nothing special about the Shenav 2, and you are forced to examine your last option in the deck, which is the Machbet anti-air defense system. The Machbet, and finally we get to our last unavoidable option, the Machbet. I had people trying to compare the Machbet to the Tunguska. Some went as far as saying that the Machbet is an OP unit, and I'm simply grabbing my head and I want to knock my head on the goddamn keyboard here. Where do those stupid people get off comparing the Machbet to the Tunguska? I mean, the Machbet is a pretty decent unit, but the Tunguska fires more than 3 times as fast as the Machbet, and 1 Tunguska by itself can take out anything out of the sky in a very short while. I mean, it fires 2,777 rounds per minute, while the Machbet fires only 880 rounds per minute. The Tunguska has guided missiles that cannot be targeted by seed, that by themselves can reach a decent range of 2,625 meters with 7 HE powers on them and 65 accuracy on them. So those guided missiles alone and by themselves can serve you as your solution to any air threat by planes. So the only thing that resembles the Machbet would be the Gepard 2. Basically, the Machbet is a Gepard 2, right? So Gepard 2, you know, used by West Germany faction because basically they have the same statistics. And one would say that West Germany faction has the same problem the Israeli deck has concerning mediocre air defensive systems in its deck, but one would be almost correct if it wouldn't be for the Roland Type 3 unit, 5 units per card with 65 accuracy. That thing would not miss. It is packing 10 missiles and it can serve you as your solution using West Germany faction to deal with any aircraft In other words, it is a long-range anti-air system you would want to be using if you're using the West Germany faction. It's heavy, it has a very good mobility, 150 road speed, off-road speed of 80 kilometers per hour, autonomy of 600 kilometers, and accuracy, as I just mentioned, of 65%, which is amazing, and even a pretty decent range, a little bit over 3.5 kilometers. Adding to that, the fact that Germany medium tanks are great with amazing AP power on them, and the infantry carriers are also amazing, like the Murder 2. So you see, you still have a better deck than Israel, far superior in every way. If you're using the West Germany faction. So I have crossed over and glanced over on each and every single other faction nation in this game, going over them one by one via the use of the armory, and guess what? Almost every single nation in this game has an amazing solution countering aircraft using long-range anti-air defensive system. Most of them have at least one amazing unit to counter planes with a ground unit, in addition of even having 10 times stronger deck than the Israeli deck. The units on other decks that can be chosen for the role of countering planes from the ground mostly use better accuracy than Israel, better ranges than what Israel is using, better road speed, better off-road speed. The number of missiles they can carry is larger than what Israel can carry, and some of them even have abilities of not being able to get targeted by seed. So most of them, all in all, if not all of them, are cost effective. So you are getting a very good deal in terms of points invested, considering the units that you are getting. Let me just say that while other nations, well, some of the other nations do exhibit the same mediocrity in the long-range anti-air department in their support tab, same as Israel, they are still considered strong nations compared to the Israeli nation deck, because they still possess strong suits in other departments that the Israeli deck simply does not have those strong suits. And the Israeli faction is still struggling with deficiencies in those very same departments. So as I said before, in terms of troop carriers, medium tanks, recon tabs, super weapons that Israel does not have, other nations might have mediocre air defense systems. I mean, some of them might have mediocre air defense systems, same as Israel, but they compensate for that by having strong suits in other departments, whereas Israel is lacking in those very same departments and is struggling with deficiencies. So the Israeli deck is a big deficiency problem that cannot be resolved. It cannot be resolved by itself, but can only be resolved by intervention by the game developers. Okay, I'm sorry, but I must say it now. The Israeli deck is total crap. The Mahbet basically is a gapper too, so you have half a solution to the problem, not a full solution. Just half a solution, and you will need to micromanage them closely to get results out of them. You might as well be cutting the range of 2,625 meters in half, because they can be targeted by seed. The Mahbet can be targeted by seed, and that means that while trying to activate and deactivate the radar on them to avoid being hit by seed, basically doing so cuts down the response time that you have, and the time they have of firing on the enemy planes. And so you would need to have at least 2 or maybe 3 of them in groups in order to counter incoming plane once you activate the radar system on them. And again, once you observe that the sky is clear out of seed planes and it is safe to engage and to activate the radar system on those very same Machbets. They lack the range to take down enemy planes from long range, so you can forget about having long range anti-air support for your units, but they can be effective if your enemy is careless or stupid. And this will just have to do with you using them in collaboration and combination with using 2 air superiority type of fighters planes, using 2 slots out of the air support tab, and that's it. In the next video we are going to talk about the recon tab, the super weapons, and possible solutions to fix the Israeli deck deficiencies. So until then, let's pray for that shitty deck, and have a good day, and I will work on the next video as fast as I can, so please be patient. I'm doing the best that I can, and that's it for now.